I never thought a wheelchair ramp could start a war, but then I never met Georgia Cooper. She taped a bright red violation notice to my door and in 3 sharp lines declared my ramp an unauthorized structure. It was a wheelchair ramp. For my father, a retired firefighter who'd lost the use of his legs to a stroke and still insisted on doing things his own damned way. So let me get this out right away. I built that ramp because I couldn't stand watching him fight the steps. I'd measured checked codes called the county hotline and made sure every bolt and railing was by the book. It wasn't a neon sign. It wasn't an eyesore. It matched the house anchored to the porch like it belonged there. But visual harmony apparently matters more than a human being's ability to get inside his own home, at least in Maple Ridge. Georgia didn't come with a conversation. She came with a paper and a posse, 2 board members with the posture of men who'd watched power work for them before, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Remove it within 14 days, she said, as if 14 days could dismantle the shame of being dependent. When I told her the Americans with Disabilities Act protects modifications like this, she handed me another paper, a fine for $5,000. And when I pushed back, she slid across a document that looked disturbingly official, a court summons stamped and signed threatening foreclosure if I didn't comply. That was the moment it stopped being about a ramp and started being about survival. You'd think the sight of someone trying to steal your home would make the neighbors rise up. Instead, the room at the community center, packed to the rafters that night, was filled with faces that could not meet my eyes. Tom, my next-door neighbor, who once told me he thought the HOA was out of control, looked like he'd swallowed his courage whole. The silence told me something I didn't want to hear. People weren't quiet because they agreed with Georgia. They were quiet because they were scared. I marched that fake summons to Daniel Ray as a lawyer with a jaw like a bank vault and an impatience for nonsense. He laughed once short and sharp when he saw it. "This is a forgery," he said. He pointed out the misspelled judge name, the wrong case number, the stamps that hadn't been in circulation for years. Relief hit me immediate and ridiculous, but then Daniel dug deeper and made me sit down. What he found made relief die in my throat. A list of foreclosures, property records, transfers to a single entity, GCP Holdings, Georgia Cooper Properties. A dozen houses, more titles, swapped, deeds assigned, money moved in ways a small-town HOA shouldn't know how to handle. "She's been running a racket," Daniel said. "Fake fines, bogus court papers, intimidation, and then she either buys the property herself or one of her companies does." The image of Georgia's perfectly manicured hands suddenly started to look like a ledger with blood on it. Every story, Tom's the old couple down on Birch Lane, the mother who nearly lost her house over a fake fence violation, they fit into a timeline that was ugly and precise. It wasn't sloppy, petty vindictiveness, it was a business model dressed up in bylaws. We filed a real suit. Fraud, extortion, conspiracy, we named it what it was. And the response was exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd been getting away with it for years: arrogance. Georgia hired a big city attorney who wore a tie like an announcement. He sauntered into court the way people do when they think their money is a legal shield. But the thing about arrogance, especially built on forged papers, is that it's terrible at standing up to evidence. In court, Daniel was surgical. He didn't yell, he didn't grandstand. He laid out the paper trail like a map to a buried chest. He showed forged violation notices, fake summons, bank transfers, properties sold to shell companies, HOA minutes altered after the fact. When he clicked through the records and spotlighted the GCP Holdings transfers, the wind went out of the room. Homeowners who'd been hollowed out by fines were there in person, and when they spoke, the lies stopped sounding like rules and started sounding like crime. There was a twist, the kind you see in movies but hope never to have to step into in real life. Tom, the guy who'd looked away, stood up, voice shaky at first and then steady, and told the court how Georgia had leaned on him, how she'd threatened him with fines and legal action until he signed blank compliance forms. He'd been scared, sure, who wouldn't be, but when he saw the paper trail and the faces of people who'd lost everything, he found his voice. That moment changed the room. It changed the tenor of the trial. The coward became the catalyst. When the verdict came, it didn't feel like a sentence so much as a release. All fraudulent fines were wiped, the illegally seized titles were ordered unraveled, and Georgia Cooper was ordered to repay every penny. They stripped the HOA of its authority, and the state opened a criminal probe. Fraud charges followed. She walked out of that court not like a queen dethroned, but like a counterfeit pretending to be the real thing exposed, angry and broke. But the satisfying part, the part that made you want to clap in a courtroom you'd only seen on TV, came later. Georgia's accounts were frozen. Investigators seized assets, bank accounts, investments, and yes, her mansion paid for in part with funds she'd pilfered from the people she was supposed to serve. They auctioned it off. I don't know what made me raise my hand that day. Maybe it was the thought of a roof she bought with other people's fear being turned into something else. Maybe it was a stubborn need to make sure the ramp didn't win for nothing. I won the auction. The room was small, almost merciful in its plainness, and Georgia sat there like a specter in the back hair, a mess suit, ill-fitting the mask finally off. I signed the papers. The title was mine. And then I did something you probably wouldn't expect. I didn't move in. I didn't flip it for profit. I didn't gloat. I called a nonprofit that builds homes for disabled veterans and signed over the deed. Georgia's mansion, her symbol, became a place for people who'd earned the right to enter a house without fighting the stairs. The news ate it up, of course, the headlines, the talk shows, the small-town chatter. Some of it was satisfying in that petty human way, like seeing a bully get his comeuppance. But the real satisfaction wasn't in watching Georgia's empire fall. It was in watching those families get their lives back. A mother who had been forced to sell her house for pennies got restitution. The elderly couple on Birch Lane moved back into their home. Tom showed up at the ribbon cutting for the renovated mansion and cried like a man who'd lost and then found more than he'd known was missing. There's a moral in all this, and it didn't arrive like a sermon. It was a slow, hard blink of recognition, the kind you get when you realize something small you accepted as normal was actually the problem. Power left unchecked becomes a machine, not necessarily evil in some abstract sense, but dangerous because it makes people believe rules are more important than people. And greed, when dressed up as governance, smells like inevitability until someone pulls back the curtain. I didn't set out to be a hero, I set out to build a ramp. But building that ramp revealed a fracture line in a little town, a fracture that had been widened by fear and polish and paper. If there's one thing to take away, and I hope you do, it's this. Look past the polite notices, past the smiles that don't reach the eyes, and ask who benefits when rules become swords. If you see someone being bullied by process, don't assume the process is neutral. The last scene for me, the one that felt like real justice, was not Georgia in an orange jumpsuit, though she did face charges. It was the day we hung a new flag on that mansion's porch and cut the ribbon for the first family to move in, a veteran in a wheelchair who pushed his chair up the ramp I had once built for my dad and laughed like a person who'd just been handed a small, pure victory. When he said thank you, it wasn't to me alone, it was to a room full of people who decided to stop being afraid. So here's the part where I ask you, when you get a notice in your mailbox, when someone tells you rules are rules, who do you call? Who do you stand with? When power whispers compliance and your instinct says help, which side are you on? If you have a story of an HOA, of a boss, of someone who used rules to hide greed, tell it. Share it in the comments. Tell me where you stood or where you wish you'd stood. And if you like this, share it not for me, but for the people who don't have a lawyer or a neighbor named Tom who finally speaks up. Sometimes justice needs witnesses. Be one.